what's solitude, right? Like what people will be like, I'm listening to a podcast by myself, that's solitude. But I don't think so. You know what I mean? I think it's really just like sitting with yourself and with your own thoughts. And I think it's hard work. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle to do it.
Welcome to the Unpacking Creative Lives podcast. I'm your host, Barney Preet, and this week we're talking to Meghna Bali. Meghna is a journalist and photographer based in Sydney. She has worked for publications such as Xplore Sydney, Hijacked, Network 10, and the ABC. Now she's working with the ABC's Triple J Hack, where she writes and produces radio and digital stories for Triple J's youth current affairs. In this week's episode, we talk about her work, cultural expectations, solitude, and friendships. Just a warning that there will be adult language used in this episode, so if that's not your thing, feel free to skip it. Just before we go ahead with the episode, if you do want to keep up and get notified about these episodes, come on my Instagram at @IamBarneyPreet, and you can follow me there, or you can come on YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, let's go. How is the COVID-free weekend? Restrictions free. How's that been? It's been a week now.
Yeah, you know what? It took about 2 days for things to get back to normal. I thought it was going to take a lot longer.
Yeah.
Like I really enjoyed like having a lot of time to myself over the last year and a half. And it's so funny because like how quickly my social calendar has started filling up again. Like
yeah.
I love it, but I'm having a bit of Stockholm syndrome from COVID. I miss it.
Have you become more protective of your time?
Yeah, I have actually. I just think I've never really used to prioritize my own time before. So I never used to really prioritize my time before. And during COVID, like we were all forced to kind of do it. And I realized how much I enjoyed it and how much like I had like filled my social calendar or just like my life up with all these things and constantly like being surrounded by people and, you know, not having that much time to yourself just because you're having fun and you're with your friends. But COVID's made me appreciate my time a lot more.
Mm. Do you recommend solitude?
Yeah. But it's hard. I actually think it's really hard because like to sit with yourself and to think and also like not like what's solitude, right? Like what people will be like, I'm listening to a podcast by myself, that's solitude. But I don't think so. You know what I mean? I think it's really just like sitting with yourself and with your own thoughts. And I think it's hard work. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle to do it.
If it's a little painful, then you're in the right space.
Totally. For growth, if that's your aim.
Yeah.
If you're just looking to blow off some steam and distract yourself, just watch Squid Game on Netflix. Yeah. Don't worry about sitting with yourself.
That's just like turning off your brain, you know.
Totally. Which has its space.
Yeah.
On that. But yeah, solitude though, and thinking and being with your thoughts and wanting to grow, that's a whole different headspace.
Yeah, it is. I was listening to a clip from this podcaster, the podcast called Modern Wisdom. And this guy, his name's Chris, and he navigates the whole podcast. He's the host. And he was talking about the importance of discomfort. And it's just a general thing that everyone says. It's not just him, but at that point it was him that said it, but just being comfortable with the discomfort, which is, it's like, if you're a bit uncomfortable with your life, like that's okay. You know, you're kind of on the right track because you're growing, you know, you're kind of expanding. So COVID definitely expanded you.
No, I totally agree with that. It's not just COVID. I mean, I don't think I've had a contract longer than a year for like the last 5 years, right? So there comes like a stage at the end of every year where I'm like hustling for another gig. Are you
sick of it, or are you just ready for something new?
I think I really like it. Like it's uncomfortable in the sense that like I'm always having to look for other roles at the end of a year or after, 13, 14 months. But I really love it because it keeps you sort of on your toes. It keeps you, on your A game when you've only got like 12 months to do something. But every time I change a gig at the beginning of the year, I hate it for about 2 months just because it's so unfamiliar. It's so uncomfortable. You sort of just get the hang of doing the last thing you did after 12 months and then you start doing something else. And I absolutely hate it. But then it gets to the 6-month mark and it gets to the 7th month mark. And you're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did this because, I get to do something different and I get to explore different skills. And I think, that's the payoff of the initial discomfort. But I think it's like it's a fear of it's a fear of change. That's what it is. Not that you can't, and there's a bit of imposter syndrome, or there's a bit of sort of like, I don't know if I can do this, and it sort of comes across as like, oh shit, I don't want to do it. But then once you sort of get the hang of it and you put a bit of effort into it, it does feel good.
Yeah. I mean, and change is inevitable. We hate it, but we need it.
Completely. Like if you think about, doing something for the next, our parents, did the same jobs for like 30 years, 40 years. And I cannot even fathom that. Not that in this economy we can afford to do that, but like just the thought of doing one thing for such a long time. Like I think we're like our generation, we're never going to survive that.
I feel like there are some people in our generation who still think like that and believe that, like the comfort of having that lifestyle for a long time. But there's certainly like a lot of people like, yeah, nah, that's not happening, And they also, like, I remember when mom and dad gave me advice, it was a lot of comfort advice, especially my dad. But my mom was like, I remember picking my electives. I don't know how it was picking your electives at high school, but for me, I sat down and my dad was like, you should do law. You could be a good lawyer, it would be a great job for you. Very stubborn. I was like, yeah, thanks, dad. And then I go to mom and mom's like, this is why we came here. You do what you want to do, so kind of a blend of two. But I really want to know something else about, in regards to journalism. Like, what was the moment that made you decide that you wanted to take journalism?
Big question.
Yeah. I mean, like, what was the catalyst? I remember, let me take you back. We were at, I think, a grandma's cafe or something in Alexandria. That was the first time we met, or the second time we met. And I remember, I mean, for all the viewers and listeners, Meghna bought a painting from me in my arty farty days, like at art school. And that's pretty much how we met. And I was just like, oh my God, somebody wants to buy my painting. That's ridiculous. Like it made it feel so real. And then we had coffee after coffee. And it was in Alexandria. I remember when you were like, I'm thinking about leaving law. I probably won't tell mom and dad for a while. And that was very clear. And I just remember, like, what was that? What was that stirring at that time?
Look, I didn't full disclosure, unlike a lot of my friends and colleagues in the industry, like I didn't have any burning desire or anything to be a journo from a young age. Like I wasn't watching, the ABC and the 7 p.m. news and the, 9 news at night and being like, I'm going to be on TV. Like I had no burning desire to do that. But what I was lost at uni. I did, that experience you mentioned of, brown girls arguing with their parents and our parents thinking, we'd make good lawyers is a pretty common experience, and one I had as well. So like
they use it as leverage for their argument. I was like, that's cute.
Totally. They're like, this isn't going to serve us in any other way. We might as well push it towards,
just put it into
into a stable career.
Channel it somewhere positive. Don't bring it home.
Totally. And I remember like at the end of year 12, like I was like, I don't know. What do I know? I'm like 18 years old. I don't know what I want to do. But I knew that my parents wanted me to do law. And at that time, you couldn't do like single law degrees. So you had to do a double degree. And I knew that I didn't want to do anything related to finance or math because I was so rubbish at it. And all my mates were doing like accounting and finance and all these things. And I was like, okay, I've got 3 options with the marks I've gotten after my HSC. And I was like, I can either go into arts, I can go into communications, or I can go into business and commerce, like on top of the law. And I was like, arts, with this reputation in our community of of picking the arts, which is like, totally rubbish.
It's fluff. It's complete fluff though. They think it's cute.
And I was like, okay, maybe not. What did I know? I'm wiser now, I think. And I was like, business commerce, nah, that's not happening. And I was like, communication seems all right. And I remember I didn't really take it very seriously. I didn't, I was a bit of a muppet at uni, to be honest. And I remember though, at the end of my 3rd year, there was this opportunity through Western Sydney Uni, the uni I went to, where people could apply for like this internship, and the uni would pay for you to spend like 8 or 9 weeks in India or Nepal, and you just like this, all expenses paid, like go and like have this internship with an international newspaper. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I applied for it on a whim.
I want a trip.
I didn't tell my parents. I was like 20 and 21.
Let's go for a holiday. Right, Sub.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm getting
Such
out
a classic Punjabi, Meghna.
I was just like, look, I'm not going to be able to leave my house in any other way. I'm 21 years old. Like, work is the way,
And you were ready to take a break, just be away for some time.
Totally. And I was like, I'd been at uni for 3 years. I'm like, I need a change. I want to travel by myself. And it just didn't seem like an option just to do it. And I didn't really have the money to do it. And I thought, oh, this is a great way to, try and fulfill all those things. And then, like, to my surprise, I got it. I was just like, what the hell did one person put the application in? And and I ended up getting it for Nepal. And I remember leaving that year and going for like the 8-9 weeks, whatever it was. And I just remember being in Nepal and like going out on the road, doing all these different kinds of stories, being in a completely different culture and atmosphere. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, people get paid to talk to people and write about them. And I was like, this is like the world's biggest rort, like, honestly. And I was like, this is amazing. This feels so good. And it felt so right. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I came back, and it took me like from that moment to when I came back from Nepal to like when I took a break from uni to try and pursue the journalism thing full time. It took me about 8 or 9 months to gather up the courage to do it, because brown girl in a household that wanted her to be a lawyer, I was like, this is it felt like a lot of pressure. And it feels so weird reflecting on it like 9 years later, 8 years later. You're like, oh my God, like I'm the boss of me. I can do whatever I want. But at that time, like, you do feel a lot of pressure because you're leaving this really successful, potentially successful career path, and one that's probably going to make you a lot of money, and you're quitting uni on a whim. So like, if that went south, I would have had no degree, dropped the law path, and I would have been, just someone doing free internships. But thankfully that didn't happen. But that was really the catalyst for me to, eventually, become a journo.
How did you break it to your parents? And how did they react? Come on.
I remember like sitting, like having cha with my parents.
That's a good start. You got to start the conversation with cha.
I was like, let me butter them up a little bit. Let me make them some cha. Right.
Okay. Makhan la liya hun, let's go.
Makhan la liya. And then I was like, oh, mom and dad, I've given it a lot of thought. And I went in with a plan, right? I was like, I'm going to give them like 2 or 3 scenarios as to how I'm going to make this work and what I'm going to do if it doesn't work out, right? I was like, there's these love plans. And I was like, I'll give them the pros and cons list. And I was like, have your jar. I'm like, okay, mom and dad, like, I've been thinking, this uni thing is really, I'm not enjoying it. I don't think, if I don't enjoy it, I don't think I'm going to excel at it. And I was like, but I do have something that I really enjoy. And I've been, and I was like, my plan was, okay, I really enjoy this thing. And if you give me a year to make it work, and it doesn't work out, I will go back to law. But if at the end of the year I've got a full-time job, then I get to do it. And my dad's first question was, are you asking us or telling us? Right.
The amount of times my dad has said that, and my mum too, is beyond.
And I was like, and I'm a bit bearish and I'm like that, right? I'm like, I'm telling you. Because if you say you're asking them, they've got an option to say no, right? And I was like pretty confident. I was like, all I knew was I am not doing another like torts exam. I am not doing like trusts and credits and whatever the hell other subjects.
So they could cut through the BS and know that you were like, this is actually what I want to do. And this 100%. Is what I say might go, but this is what I want to do.
My best shot at this is to be confident and be like, I've made up my mind. right? If you give them an option, and I feel like often like brown girls as opposed to guys do this. I've actually noticed this a lot in our community and my friendship groups and everything. I think as girls we always want to keep the peace, right, in our household. We always, and maybe it comes from also being like the older sibling, right? But I look at younger siblings and I look at guys sometimes in households and they're just like, we're just doing this. And just regardless of what your parents sort of think about it and whether they're upset or not, they're like, yeah, we're doing it, they'll get over it. Whereas, girls are like, oh, but I really want to do this, but I want you guys to be happy too. And because we keep pursuing that, oftentimes we're like, we're like,
There's like
worry.
an intangible pressure. It's really strange because, I mean, it's not so strange when you think about everything in our generation and our community and the culture of us. But if you think about from a younger child's perspective, from like the baby child's perspective, I agree. We are ruthless. Like with my parents, it was like, I tell them what happens after I made the decision, which has angered them a lot. That's been really hard. But because I've absorbed it and I've decided, they just experience the repercussions. Like I give them no warnings and it wasn't intentional. Like I'm not trying to be dramatic. I think I'm so focused on making the decision that I'm like, okay, this is what happened. And I remember like when I worked as a flight attendant for Virgin, I remember I left Virgin for like a small organic shop business, like such a small one, local business. And I took it and then I told them like within 30 minutes and they were so angry. But it's like I've absorbed it. So now I have the capacity to observe your absorption. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Do you know what I think helps in those scenarios? Also reflecting on see, the stuff we do as kids and the decisions we make, they're not made in isolation, right? Like we've seen stuff in our households, the way our parents behave and interact, and our personalities are also a reflection of their upbringing, right? So oftentimes when my parents get pissed at something I do or a decision I've made, I'm like, take a second to think about where I'm coming from and how many times you've behaved in this exact way, right? So one of the first things my dad said after I said I was going to leave law and do what I wanted to do was like, this makes sense because I did the same thing back in the 80s to my dad. And he was like, of course it was going to come back, right? And he sort of meant it like more like,
okay, I definitely shouldn't have kids then.
He was basically like, he was kind of like, when I was 18, my parents didn't want me to leave Chandigarh, but I did it anyway because I envisioned a different life for myself. And he's the youngest of 4 siblings. And he was like, I did that because I knew what I wanted and I knew that better than my parents knew it, right? And I was like, okay, but channel that same energy into the news that I'm giving you, pointing out that our parents have behaved in similar ways to how we are is helpful because they're like, oh, okay, actually, they understand it from.
You did this and you made me. So do the maths.
100%. And I think, that self-reflection, that mirror, I think is really helpful when you're trying to, have productive conversations around these things.
You worked at the Nepali Times, you worked in Newcastle, you worked for ABC, you worked for Xplore Sydney. Can we talk about Xplore Sydney for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what did you learn about Sydney when you explored it? Because you really digged into the pockets of Sydney.
Yeah. I think I learnt less about Sydney and more about the industry. But in terms of Sydney...
so what did you learn about the industry? Tell me about that.
I learnt that, you mentioned that, I worked at a bunch of places. And yes, there was definitely an element of overcompensation there that I can do this. But it's also reflective of how broken the journalism industry is, that you have to do 4 or 5 unpaid internships before you can get taken seriously in this industry, when people are looking at your resumes, when you're applying for those big sort of organizations like the ABC and the Guardian and the SBS and commercial stations, they're looking, you're competing with people that have done 10 unpaid internships, 6 unpaid internships, and and that's another point. If you've got the time and energy and privilege and the support of your parents to do it, that's how you're going to get anywhere in this industry, right? It's so difficult to break through if you're trying to also pay rent and make a living. And then you're also, when it's time to do the unpaid internship. So that was, Xplore Sydney was one of the first places that I did an internship, and where I learnt how to pick up the phone, talk to people, and understand what their stories were. What did I learn about Sydney? I learned that people love to drink and eat and go to amazing places. And I learned that what a cool fucking gig. I literally got to go around to bars and restaurants and have a chat to people about their passion and why they started working in the hospitality industry, how they got to where they were. And then I got free food and drinks out of it. It was a dream gig, but it was only possible because I come with a certain level of privilege, and I was, able to afford being in that position.
What do you think is the sustainability approach to a tight-knit group?
Do you mean my friendship group?
Mm-hmm. I think your friendship and like your overall community base there, like family and friends.
Yeah. I think a certain level of amnesia is required to stay sane. I don't know. I think like sometimes obviously every group has its issues. Everyone gets into fights. As we get older and our priorities change, those conflicts increase because you're not all on the same page, right? But I think fighting it out, getting over it.
Like actually talking about it and getting through it as opposed to avoiding it.
Yeah, actually talking about it. I think when you avoid it and when that resentment builds and you get to a stage where like your care factor's so low, you don't really give a shit about trying to keep up appearances. And because like everyone knows, oh fuck, I hate her guts, I hate his guts, whatever it is. Right? COVID's made it really clear who your friends are, right? And what I realized was that when you have to like put in effort on the phone, picking up a phone and talking to someone, FaceTiming someone.
Well, let's be clear. Let's just first start by saying that you weren't a phone person.
I was never a phone person. I hate it. I was like, oh my God, the thought of having conversations on the phone. My friends, I'm very much like, I'm an extroverted person. You put me like in a party situation, you put me like at brunch or at a club or whatever, I am more than happy like to talk to people. And, I thrive in those situations. If you ask me to call someone at like 7:00 at night or something and have like a heart to heart with them, oh my God, nothing gives me more anxiety. But
wow. Can you tell me where that comes from?
Where does that come from? You know where it comes from. I hate talking about myself. And when
this is great. This is the great conversation we're having.
So because I wasn't able to be in social scenarios outside of multiple people, if I want to keep up with my friends, because I love them and I want to talk to them and I want to make sure they're okay, I have to pick up the phone because text wasn't cutting it. Like it's not enough, right? And then after a while, phones don't cut it. You want to FaceTime because you want to see your friends. You miss them. And I realized, and so that's how I got over that. But what I realized was that when you're having one-on-one conversations with people on the phone, there's only so many questions you can ask them about themselves before a question gets turned back around at you. Hey, Meg, what's happening? What's new? What's da-da-da? And I realized—
And it's like, what update do you give them?
Totally. But even if you do have an update, what I realized was how uncomfortable I was answering those questions. I'm like, I'm the one who asks questions. I don't want to be asked questions. And that was a realization that I had over the last year. And then I was like, oh my God, like this is, but also it occurred to me like how that's an imbalanced friendship. Like I can't just know everything about you and not tell you anything in return, right? It's a give and take. And it's investment and it's care. I think the imbalance does start to strain a relationship because when you're like, if you're not giving anything in return, it's a one-sided relationship. It doesn't have to be like deep, dark secrets, but it's also just like revealing parts of yourself. Oh, my day was this, but like a genuine want for the other person to know. And I think like when there's a lack of that, when you feel like the other person isn't invested in you for whatever many reasons, then like you don't have a lot of motivation to try and keep that relationship alive long term. Do you know what I mean? If you feel like there's no investment from the other side, even though it could be my fault that there's no investment from the other side. But if that imbalance is there, then there's one person, it's just, it feels like it's not a two-way street.
When it comes to your professional relationships, how do you maintain those if you do?
Drinks.
Yeah.
Drinks is one way. Friday night drinks, blowing off steam, going out for lunch together. That's one way of doing it. But I think like one thing I've learned, especially in the current team I'm in, it's a younger team, and every morning we have this editorial at 10 o'clock, and it's not just about work. I think that's the important thing. When we're at work, I've got a colleague, Serge, right? And he's like the one, everyone's got this one person in your friendship group or your work group that has like, he's the person that's like, this story could have only happened to you. You know how we all have those friends, like they come up with the most ridiculous stories. And if anyone else told them, you'd be like, I smell bullshit. But because it's this person, you're like, oh no, I can actually believe that happened to you. But the great thing about him is he starts the meeting and he'll tell you some ridiculous story from the weekend. He'll tell you like the most banal, trivial things about his life. And it makes you invested in him. It's like, oh my God, Serge, like you love snakes, right? Look at this snake I came across, on my walk through the park this weekend. And you start building a relationship from there. But if your entire thing is like strictly business, you're only talking about work, you're only talking about, it's a means to an end. I don't know. I struggle keeping up relationships with my colleagues when it's just that dynamic. But if you're like being open about your life and, you're sort of having a chat about those things, you become invested.
So what do you bring that's not work related? If somebody else brings snakes, what's like your thing that you bring?
Look, a lot of the time my thing is like my own life culture, we did whatever it is, like we've got a job this weekend. That's going to be my story for Monday. This ridiculous thing that happens in our culture where the women fast all day for the men and they don't have to do it. And I know the reaction I'm going to get. They're going to be like, what the fuck? That makes no sense.
But fasting is great for you. So I guess that's one way to look at it.
But then it's also my job to be like, no, guys, like there is a feminist angle here. It's an opportunity for all these women to get together and have a good time and be away from their partners and just be themselves. And they get to blow off steam. It's not just about their husband. It's about them having a good time. So a lot of the time it's about me explaining my culture to them and, sort of being like, hey, this is me. This is where I come from. And then they really appreciate that. It's a beautiful team.
Do you recommend, you've seen a lot of people in relationships in their 20s and starting relationships really young. Do you recommend being in a relationship in your 20s?
Yeah. Do you mean long-term relationships or just like relationships in general?
I guess, yeah, I think so. I think long-term relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got heaps of friends that have been in like these epic teen to mid-20s relationships, these 8, 9, 10-year relationships, right? And
sweethearts.
Sweet. They've found the love of their lives at the age of 16, 17, 18, and they do the whole shebang. They get married when they're 23, 24, and they do the big Punjabi wedding. So many of my friends. I don't know. It's so hard to say because I'm not one of those people that had that experience, but I've always been a little bit wary of it because I'm like, it's such a huge chunk of your life that you're spending with someone, which you'd otherwise spend discovering yourself, right? But then how do you know who you are in a relationship? Like, how do you know who you are as an individual when you've been part of a relationship for 10 years?
Like who you are without them.
Who you are without them. Like, how do you know what I mean? And those are like your prime years. Those are like, you're just trying to figure out who you want to be, what you want to do, how you deal in situations of stress and anxiety and all those things. Not to say that those things don't happen later on, but it's a period in which you've sort of got the permission to do whatever you want and struggle and hustle before, all these external forces start coming in, right? I'm like, but who do you know who you are when you've only ever been in a relationship and you've been with a person, for the last 10 years of your life? But again, like I'm saying that from the perspective of someone who hasn't been in one. My sister is one of those people. And I've seen her and her partner grow into like a really, everyone has, obviously every couple has issues. Everyone goes through, hard times. But, watching them grow up together has also been like a really enriching experience. Like I love them both, and they work so well together. So, but I've also seen people that have like come out of 6-year long relationships and they're like, fuck, I don't even know how to be by myself anymore. So yeah, I mean, there's different opinions. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an opinion on it, but but I've seen people go through a wide range of emotions in those situations.
If you could go back knowing that you would find someone who's like the one, would you go back and have that long-term relationship for like a decade?
Look,
or are you good?
if they're the one, I'll
Yeah.
come across them at some point in my life.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would want to do it at the age of 16. I've done so much stuff in my life without thinking and impulsively, And do you know, when I went to Nepal at the end of 2013,
Yeah.
that was the same year that horrific assault case happened in Delhi. Her case, right? And I was actually supposed to go to India. And at the last moment, the uni made a decision to send me to Nepal, right? Make of that what you will. So I don't know if I was in a relationship, whether I would have gone on that trip. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that would have happened like that. And that would have changed the course of what I did over the next 9 years, 8 years. Do you know what I mean? I've done so much traveling by myself. When I look back at it in hindsight, I'm like, what the fuck was I doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, I had like 3 or 4K in my bank account, and I was like, a sensible person would have been like, save this, get a job, do something else. I quit my job and spent like 34 hours going to Cuba. You know what I mean? Opposite side of the world, put myself in some ridiculous scenarios. And I was like, I don't know if I would have done that if, or like even quit uni, or I don't know how I would have reacted because I'm not in that situation. All I'm saying is a lot of like the things that I see as triggers now in my life, for some really fantastic things that have happened in my life, maybe wouldn't have happened if I had to think about someone else also in my life. And I would have wanted to do it for them. It wouldn't have felt like a burden, I think. But it also would have meant I didn't get to have those experiences. So if they're the one, I'm going to meet them now too, or at whatever point in my life. I don't have to go back and do it when I'm 16.
I'm working with children between the ages of 6 and 9, and they're all multiple age groups in one classroom. And who they are at that point is who they really are. Like their purest self, without any influences before teenagehood, before adulthood. And what I realize happens is that when you go through your life for 2 decades, however long it is, there's a return to that person that when you were really young, there's a return to who you really are, and who you really are without truly thinking is that, that 6, 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old self who doesn't overthink things, is. Do you feel like you still have that essence of who you are?
I try to channel it when I can.
Tell me more.
So it's constant in my mind. I'm 29 now. I turned 29 recently, right? And the thing that the thought that I woke up with that morning was, I don't want to stop being a kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just remember thinking, like, the life that I have right now, I love it. Like I was thinking about my 20s, and I was like, the stuff I have done in my 20s, I would not trade it for anything. Mistakes, good, bad, whatever it is, right? And I was like, and a large part of that is because of that impulsiveness, but also because like there is an element of like not giving a shit about what people like in a really broad like values sense. I do give a shit about what people think, but I just mean like in a broad values sense, like nothing anyone says can change what I really want to do. Do you know what I mean? And that comes from just like wanting to have fun, maintaining friendships, wanting to do really well at work, whatever the things that are that, maintaining family, all those sorts of things. But I want to do it. But there's also a sense of like, my family always says like there's a sense of like bachkanna in me. There's a sense of like me. There's always like I'm a big kid. My family's constantly saying, grow up now. That sort of thing. But I actually hold on to that for dear life. I hold on to like wanting to be a kid for dear life. But I think the important thing is like awareness, right? Like being aware of it. I noticed so over the last year, I've done a few like adult things in my
Oh
mind.
my God. I totally
Where,
feel you, man.
you know what I mean? Like I've been in a full-time job for like the last 5 years. I pay my taxes every year. You do the house thing. I recently did the house thing, right? And I'm just like, and I remember doing it, and the reason I procrastinated, or the reason that I pushed off on this house thing for so long, was because in my head, I thought the moment that I buy a house, I'm gonna turn into like this boring person who can't do things on a whim, and now everything needs like a financial impetus behind it. I need to start thinking financially, and I just didn't want to do that, and I pushed on that shit for so long until last year. COVID, priorities changed. You can't go anywhere, you can't travel anywhere. I was like, okay, well, you might as well do the house thing, right? And I was just like, to my surprise, pleasant surprise, I was like, no, I'm still a kid. Like, I still get to do the thing, and I still get to do it my way. I get to define how this is going to change my life. Do you know what I mean? But the thing is, like, it's part of growing up. Like for me, like growing up is taxes, insurance, home loans, all this sort of stuff, eyes glazing kind of stuff. In my head, like this is the shit that like turns you boring and makes you stop taking decisions that you want to take, because now all this shit's out of your control, right? So I'm hyper aware of it. And because I'm hyper aware of it, even when I'm going through these like adult boring ass processes, I still try to retain a sense of who I am and inject part of my personality in these processes. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. The idea of a mortgage makes me nauseous. And I think that's it, like overcoming that and be like, yeah, I'm still a bishop. Like I'm still, playful and having fun.
Yeah, the way I justify that stuff, and first of all, I should say, like, obviously, like a sense of privilege and family support. I think like the way, like to my earlier point of like trying to retain yourself in this process that is, sickening, and I completely agree it is a sickening process, is that like what it allows you to do. Do you know what I mean? Is it a way for you just to build wealth? Is that your goal? Or is your goal that like, I've got this thing that I want to do in my life, that requires me having a certain income, and this allows me to do it. So if that's wanting to help people, if that's wanting to raise money for a charity, if that's wanting to put your, efforts into like a creative process, funding a podcast, like all these things that you can't do with a full-time job. Like, is this what, wanting to rent, you want to live in the city, you don't have money to live in the city. Does this, it's a means to an end. What makes me uncomfortable is if my only goal was like, oh my God, I need to secure my life and I need to like prepare for, my future, and which all valid points. The thought of like, oh, I'm just going to get rich off this, like that doesn't sit right personally with me. But does it allow me to live a life and to give back in a particular way in the future? That's the way I try to justify it in my mind.
Right. Otherwise, so see the situation differently in order to digest it.
It's a mindset change. Yeah, it's a mindset change, right? Just because 90% of the people that get mortgages for a certain reason doesn't have to be the reason you get it. So what's your reason, right? And what does it allow you to do? And how does that sit with you?
Can we talk about the farmers' protest?
Sure.
You did a story on it. And can you just explain what it is to people who might not know?
Yeah. So earlier this year on Triple J Hack, which is part of ABC News, we did a story about the farmers' protests that have been happening since the end of last year in Delhi and all around India. And at the center of that is basically these 3 laws that the Modi government has passed, which they say will benefit farmers across India. The farmers disagree with that, and they say that it's actually going to hurt their livelihoods. And so to try and stop those laws from going through, farmers, especially from the Punjab region, came to Delhi to try and stop it, to do like an open protest, and to try and tell the government that they're not happy with the way that they're doing it. Those laws were passed through anyway, but the farmers have stayed there to try and tell the government that what they've done is really against their benefit. They'd rather be out in the streets of Delhi in cold weather protesting for a year rather than try and make a living off these new laws.
And why did you choose that story?
Do you know it's really difficult to get international stories up in Australian media? But this particular one I thought was important because it was all over my socials. A bunch of people had gotten in touch with me to cover it. But also I thought it was a really important story to do. There's millions of Indians in Australia. A lot of them are from the Punjabi community. It's an issue that is extremely relevant to a huge migrant community in Australia. And there has been a trend over the since Narendra Modi came into power, of their government making decisions that negatively impact minorities in India. And the impact of that has also filtered into Australia. So at the time when the farmers' protests were happening, there was a riot that happened in Harris Park, which is referred to as Little India in Sydney. And as a result of those farmers' protests, there were riots here between Hindus and Sikh people in Sydney. And those sorts of tensions haven't risen in the Indian diaspora for decades. But because of the Modi government and the way that his right-wing followers feel emboldened by his government and his decisions, there's a trend of that kind of hatred filtering into Australia. And I thought it was important to cover that farmer story because it was actually indicative of such a wider issue happening in India right now, which is the radicalization of youth in India. There's so much hatred at the moment against minorities. I thought it was important to capture that moment and to inform the young Australians about this issue.
In regards to journalism, what's the ultimate dream?
Yeah. The ultimate dream, I think, for me in journalism is to just keep telling stories that are hidden away, that don't get much attention, and to tell these stories and to create impact, to create change. I think over the ultimate dream would be to do that on a larger scale, to try and do, the foreign correspondent thing personally, to try and go to places like India and the Middle East and different places around the world and to cover those stories because things are so much more hectic there than they are in a country like Australia, right? So yeah, to be able to tell those stories and to affect change is always the goal.
What are you most excited about? What's coming up for you?
Oh, next year I do start the Andrew Olley Scholarship, which is basically I get to spend all year learning from the best journalists at the ABC about how to craft powerful and impactful investigations. It is a privilege and an honour, and I'm so excited about it. Apart from that, I've got a friend's wedding coming up.
Hey.
And I'm so stoked. I'm so stoked. That wedding season is back on. He's one of my best friends in the world, and I'm so, so excited to celebrate with him.
Meghna, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, B.
Thanks for joining me on the episode. I'll see you next week for another one. All right, bye.